Okay, and our last little bit of code, just to understand what's going on, is remember we had a look at how this bit of code worked. We set up a list called scores and put the value 10 in it, print the value. We call the function add new scores and we pass in the list as a variable scores and we pass in a value 20. So the list ends up down here in the function called scores, and the value 20 ends up down here, and we append the value 20 to the list, so it then becomes 10 and 20. But notice we don't return the list. And when we got back up into main, we hadn't returned the new list, we printed the list back out. If we'd been doing this with integers or strings or immutable types, we would have seen that scores would have remained the same. You can't change something within a function and expect it to change back where you called it from. We haven't passed it back, so scores should have remained the same. But when we came to run the module, we see we print it before and after the function, and clearly we've appended the value 20. So kind of what's gone on there. Okay, so let's try and just understand what's happening here. So we're in main, we set up scores being 10, so scores is in memory, it's a list with the value 10 on it, and the variable scores is set up in main. So we call that variable scores locally scoped to main. We then call the function and we pass in scores and the value 20. So within the function, when we call the function, there is two variables. One is called scores, happens to have the same name but I really don't care, and one is called new score. So we passed in the variable 20, so 20 was sitting out there in memory somewhere, so new score will have the value 20. And when we pass in a score, we pass in the scores label. Remember, we don't actually copy it, all we do is we pass a reference. So scores also points to that same list with just 10 in there. Remember, scores is a list, so when we're in the function now and we do scores.append new score, we append 20 to the scores list, which adds 20 to the list because lists are mutable. When our function now ends, our variables within the function are killed off. The program returns back up to main where it came, and you'll notice now scores here back up in main, that variable has now had to do the new value appended because lists are mutable. We didn't create a copy of the list once we were in the function and we started playing with it. So that's why when you pass a list into a function and you alter it within a function, you don't need to return it. And for this point, when we're teaching it, the explanation we give is that potentially lists could be huge. You could imagine a list with 1,000 items in. If every time we passed a list into a function we made a copy of it, it would just take up far too much memory. It would be ridiculous, especially if we're not going to change it within the function, we're just using it. So it's quite acceptable to say that when we pass a list into a function, we pass a reference to the list in, just because it saves us copying it. And then if we change it once we're in the function, then we know we've changed the original list. And that's how that works.